Nation in Conversation, in proud partnership with Senvis, Bayer, Engine, Nedbank, AFGRI, Grain SA and John Deere, in association with Hinterland and Isuzu.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation, here from Nampo Harvest Day. Today we talk about technology, funding, yield, where does it fit in? I'm going to start with Martin, and the reason for that is we have two of the biggest, most advanced technology manufacturers in the world with us today. We've got a representative from John Deere, from Bayer specifically, Climate Corporation, from the funding side, from Nedbank, and then the chairman of Grain SA. But Martin, if I look at farming, and if I look at international price trends, it's clear that the price of commodities, of farming commodities, in real terms, is in a long downward trend. So therefore, the price is not going to assist or save the farmer. What is in the farmer's favor is volume. As the world population grows, as the income grows, the demand, not only for food, but the demand for protein keeps on increasing. So the volume demand story is sound. The price story is not there. That leaves the margin. From a point of view where you're in the middle of the farmer, technology, production, how do you approach technology?
Theo, if we take it a step back and we look what happened in the financial services. I mean, we're talking about technology as well as funding. 15 years ago, one of the big financial institutions launched a solution where they engage with customers to get them on the internet and make them connected. So it was an integration layer, and if we fast forward that to today, that's exactly what's happening with technology and funding. The lines are starting to blur. We get into a world where we get bank zero or zero, and we get time bank. So we're really digitizing the whole industry. So that's exactly what's happening with the agricultural industry. We see, even if we work out here at Nampo, all the technology, the challenge here is to integrate that. And that's where we see ourselves as Senvis, is to create a platform, a solution, where we can integrate all the various partners and bring the solution to the customer. And I personally see that as one of the biggest challenges nowadays is that there's not a lack of standardization between the various solutions. We'll talk about field view just now and see how we can integrate that into the bigger John Deere solution, and as well as to the farmer side. I mean, it means nothing if you've got a lot of data, but you can't analyze that and help the customer to make informed decisions with that.
I'll also like to take on another point is who actually owns that data, but we'll get later in the discussion. Field view, Fabio, all the way from Europe. I hope you're enjoying what you're seeing here.
Very well.
Field view, we talked about platforms, we talk about data, we talk about integration. Simply, what is field view about, and where do you fit into this matrix?
Yeah. FieldView is a digital platform on Bayer at the global level, first of all. And the most important goal for FieldView is to help the farmer to better decide, thanks to the data he collects every day from the soil, from the machinery, from the sky on a satellite image, put all together in a unique platform to better decide on what he can do better on agronomic practice to improve profit. Because at the end of the story, our goal is to help the farmer to improve profitability, because this is the most important part for the farmer. Farmer is a good job. My father is a farmer. I know very well this environment. But at the end of the story, farmers have two main goals in the world. First, a sustainability on the environment. This is a huge responsibility. The second is feed the people. But the end of the story is also profitability for himself.
None of those objectives can be achieved if you're not profitable.
Exactly. All these three need to be mixed together.
Now FieldView has been available in the rest of the world, but not in South Africa, am I correct?
Yeah, we start 4 years ago in US. After we go in Canada, Brazil. Last year we launched in Europe. And this year we start also in South Africa in September to help the farmer also in South Africa to use this digital platform to put all data in a unique place exactly to analyze. We talk about analysis of data. We want to simplify this step because today this is a complex stuff. We want to put in a funny way the way to analyze the data with your finger, to analyze zone by zone your field, to understand why one area is less productivity versus another area to better performance.
Jock, in terms of John Deere, and I must say for not only is it impressive from a guy that lives in the city to look at the machines, but the other side of that machine is not the big green machine, but it's also the technology that's built into that machine. And for years now, John Deere has been leading the technology specifically in that segment. From a technology point of view, what is your take on it? Where does it fit into and why is it important?
So Theo, maybe just a couple of thoughts there. So firstly, back to your earlier point there. I think if you're in a commodity business, whether it's agriculture or other commodities, the only way for you to outperform your neighbor is to become a lower cost producer of that commodity. That's the only way that you can do better than your neighbor. So that for us is the starting point. The trend that we see is that agriculture is moving away from bigger, faster, stronger to being more precise, more sustainable, more resilient. The third thing I want to mention is I think the medium-term challenge that agriculture has to deal with over the medium term is to link it to what Fabio said, is to say, how do we produce more food at an acceptable price without damaging the environment? So putting myself in the shoes of a producer, if I take a step back, I would break it up into three areas to say there's a production issue, there's an environmental issue, and there's a social issue. And I think as a producer, you need to take a look and say, but where do I need the help? Where would technology assist me? Is it across all three, or is it only on the production side? So that may be our starting point. It might be a really bad example, but George Clooney is advertising a coffee machine on television. The real value is not necessarily in a coffee machine, but it's that capsule that gives you the flavor, gives you the experience. And I think that's where agriculture is moving towards, to say, yes, you still have to have your tractor combine, etc. But the real value add is the technology that comes into play.
John, as a funder of agriculture,
Yes.
when you look at the client profile, let's say at the credit decision, to what extent would you rely on technology and the fact that the farmer is or is not at the forefront of technology?
So I think it's really important, and why I say that is, in my view, technology has been one of the factors that have helped farmers combat the squeezing margins that you've spoken about. I think Fabio mentioned as well, profitability is really important. And so from a bank's point of view, we're looking at repayment ability. And certainly technology, where it's been used well, and I think that's a valid point, that there's lots of technology, but how has it been used? Where that helps a farmer become financially sustainable is really important. What we've done as banks maybe not so well, and what we're good at is looking backwards. So we tend to collect financial statements. We look at the profitability over time, which is really important. It tells us what a farmer has achieved. What we need to do, I feel, as a bank going forward, is build in this information that is available now, today, this second, and how do we bring that back into our banking process? I think it goes beyond just having good information, which then a farmer can convey to his bank manager to say, listen, I take up technology, I use the best tractor, water efficiency, etc. Those are all important because we understand that he is taking up technology and he's using it well. What's more important for us going forward as a bank is in our credit modeling process is how do we feed this information into our process to look maybe possibly a more precise forward view than we have in the past. We've looked backwards. Now we need to understand what's happening now and then also look forward as well. So I think this information is critical in terms of the modern day farmer.
I'm going to, Jaco, I'll get to you just now, but Fabio, I'm going to want to just quickly go back in terms of what the funder was saying. Because in the end of any farming operation, there's a requirement for access to funding, access to liquidity, if it's input finance, if it's finance for infrastructure, it's finance for farming, there's a need from time to time for funding. In terms of your modeling and the fact that you have elements of efficiency, of predictability, can you assist in the process of let's say a application for additional funding? Is the system to that extent adaptable?
Absolutely, yes. I think the concept is to go in the return of investment approach. If I need to decide to buy a new land or to buy a new equipment, I need to have...
A new equipment does not include a Toyota Land Cruiser box.
Right. But I think it's crucial today to have a better information. This is why comes a big data. Okay, big data is not a cloud. Big data is the information that the farmer can use to better decide on where I can invest my money for the future to have better return of investment. Equipment, land, or input like a fertilizer or seed. I think this is very, very important for the funding because it's every time more critical to receive some credit. And if I receive, I need to put in the right direction my money.
Is that what you're talking about when you say we need to start to have adaptability to include technology?
Yeah, so maybe one example is, and Nedbank has, which is strange for a bank, we've taken a stake in a technology company. So Aerobotics is a company that we're supporting. They use drones to collect information. And that is more in the tree crop space, which starts to look at on a per tree basis, what is the health of the tree, how many trees there are, for example. And if we can build that information into our system as a bank, we better understand the productive potential of that farming asset. And to me, that if clients are using this technology well, that starts to indicate a lower risk profile for me as a banker.
And measurable.
Yes.
And measurable as well. It's not always foolproof. It's not like just a complete spreadsheet where you put in a few things and it spits out yes or no. I think there's still space for engagement with your client and understanding your client, etc. And in particular, how he is using that technology. Because this technology is often available to farmers across the board, but they use it differently. So the information that's specific to his farm is now becoming really important, and his management decisions, etc. And as how we work that into our systems as a bank, I think is important going forward.
Jaco, I'm going to ask you a question first as a farmer, and secondly as the chairperson of Grain SA. As a farmer, to what extent would you say would you be inclined to use or experiment with technology? Is it important? Do you use it, and how do you approach it?
I think the biggest concern is we're in an international competitive market, so we have to compete against the Brazilian farmer, the American farmer, of which the resources is way better than in South Africa. The soil is better, the rainfall is better, the production space is better. We're not talking politically in terms of regulation, but all of those are better. So you're able to compete with them, we got to do our job much better. We've got to plant better, we've got to be more efficient and use our resources much more efficient. And that's where technology comes in. That approach of technology enables me to compete with the American farmer on the right foot, on the same foot, and the Argentinian farmer. So we need to adopt technology in South Africa, enabled to be more competitive. What we've heard from most of the international guys is South Africa is one of the fastest adopters of technology, and that's mainly because of this reason. Because we need to compete, we need the technology here in terms of equipment, in terms of the right genetics, in terms of seed, a large variety of technology which we can use on the farm.
Jaco, then the follow-up question is slightly more tricky. And that's the question about, we talk about here technology being utilized by commercial farmers. John Deere's equipment is an aspirational equipment for somebody that's really successful, big farmers. How do we approach technology when we talk about farmers that we are trying to get into the small commercial space? How would one to go about that?
I think the focus there should be not a lot on mechanization, but more on the seed technology. more in the information space. So if you look in terms of seed technology, the GM technology that they already use enables them to plant conservation agriculture practices, not to work, not to need the bigger equipment, but rather to spray and use that Roundup Ready technology and other technologies that's available. I think the next step for the smallholder farmer is in terms of marketing. Getting the right information, getting the connectivity first, the right information, and then maybe an Uber for grain. I've got 5 bags of grain and I want to sell it, and you get some guy that's going to pick it up from his homestead on his small little village where he is in the rural Eastern Cape.
I'm going to stay with you and make a comment or assumption, and I'd just like your comment on it. In terms of big commercial farmers, technology gives you that 5 or 10% that increases your margin, make you sustainable, and ensure that you're productive and that you're going to be there in the next 5 years. But in a small scale farmer, technology can double or triple your profitability. Are we focusing enough on that? Because there you don't need the latest, newest, best technology. Last year or 3 years ago, technology will also do. Are we looking at that?
Yes, Theo, most certainly. We as Grain SA have got a lot of projects in the small rural areas on communal land. And what we've seen there, those farmers has been harvesting about 0.5 ton a hectare of their hectare plot. They need 1 ton per hectare in order to survive, or 1 ton to survive the year. So through new technology, better seed genetics, better herbicides, better practices and training, they've been able to harvest 4 or 5 tons per hectare. So more than double, 5 times the amount that they've harvested before. So in the implication of that, the 1 ton they need, they still have, but now all of a sudden they've got 4 tons to sell. And that's a huge income for those household farmers. So in order to double your crop is rather easy in that smallholder farmers.
Jaco, you noted the Uber for farming, and I'm going to get to Jacques on that. I was very interested when my daughter in Pretoria moved from one flat to another flat about 5 kilometers away. And there's an Uber service with guys with bakkies. And she put there the address, the time, the new address, and 1 or 2 guys pitched up and said, I can pick you up at 3 o'clock, my buckie's available. So it wasn't formal, it wasn't structured, and he stopped there, stopped. She said, this is the size, small size I need, and there was a guy with a bucky and he charged $200. And it is available. In terms of your equipment, we always talk about the heavy capital expense, and that capital expense works for 2 or 3 weeks a year, and then it's in the garage. Is there an option somewhere there?
Yeah. So firstly, just to talk to the Uber driver, you just said that the farmers are not allowed to buy Land Cruisers anymore, so they need to use it differently. So that's maybe that entrepreneurial spirit coming through. So interesting enough is John Deere has a collaboration with a third-party company called Hello Tractor, which is the Uber for tractors, which we drive across Africa. And our approach is that every small farmer does not need to own a tractor, because you need to have a certain scale to justify that capital investment.
That comes on your ROI discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So what we do with Hello Tractor is basically connecting the need with the tractor owner. And that's working really well for us, just to connect the market. In addition to that, we're now in discussions with banks to say, but the telematics that you get from the tractor, because that's cash flow finance. If you do contractor work, the more your machine works, in theory, the more money you should make. Is now working with banks to say, how do you pull that telematics into a credit scoring system to allow better finance for that contractor?
So there is that area is also being looked at.
Yes. Yeah.
Martin, we started by touching on data, big data, data analysis, and I think in the new modern world there's value in that. There's value in a quality data set. From your point of view in terms of utilization, access, open platform, ownership, where does that lie?
How we see it is from the whole application process, the customer starting his financial year in, or the new financial year. We will sit down with the customer, do a proper planning, go through the whole season and see how we can assist him in terms of, for instance, a mechanization plan. The big point here is we need to sell the tractors, but at the end of the day, we as Senve see ourselves as a solution provider. So we don't want to sell the tractor if the cash flow at the end of the day does not make sense. So we would rather go and sit with the customer and say, let's look at your grain marketing solution at that stage, and let's wait for the next year and look then at the tractor and integrate the whole business value chain from our perspective, rather than just focusing on the technology and the replacement of that.
Jock, your data that you collect, who owns it, and is it accessible, and how does your platform operate in that respect?
Yes. So I think ownership of data is always a big conversation. I think GDPR in Europe gave the world, in my mind, a really good framework to say how do we manage data.
What is that? Just give us a background.
GDPR, Global Data Privacy Regulation, basically stipulates how you need to handle data, who owns it, and through which channel can you get the mandate or the approval from a customer to do what with that data. So a customer knows exactly where's my data, where do you host it, and what do you use it for. I think in South Africa, as an outflow of GDPR is POPI Act, which is basically copy and paste. And again, it offers us a regulation to say how do we manage data and who owns that. On our platform, the data is owned by the farmer, the customer. We can work that and provide, I think, management information back to the farmer. Obviously, we might consolidate and anonymize the data and use it differently.
Come on, consolidate and?
Anonymize.
That means take the name away.
So I cannot say this is Jaco's data. A lot of farmers would like to have his data, but I'm not allowed to share that. But yes, so we will anonymize that when we consolidate.
And then you will add numbers together and you'll index it in a way.
Yes. And we've got a platform called Operations Center, where we allow all other service providers to link into that platform. So whether it's Fairview, whether it's a bank, etc. So they, provided the farmer gives the approval for that, they can link into that data and get management information out of that system.
Fabio, your position on data?
Absolutely, I'm totally in line. The farmer is the owner of the data. This is the base. Okay, I'm as the owner of the data, I can decide who is my sharing information. I can share with my dealer, I can share with my neighbor, I can share with wherever I want, because the data is mine. What we can use is the aggregated data, okay, to better improve the science, to provide a better service to come back to the farmer, as John Deere said. This is exactly the way we use the aggregated data, anonymous, we call anonymous, but is aggregated data, exactly to provide, to have a better service to come back to the farmer.
And so the key is more on research and coming back. Can a farmer say, please give me back my data?
Absolutely. Yes. It's not give me back because it's my data.
Okay.
Okay. I'm a farmer, it's my data. Okay. And exactly in Europe, we have a new policy that put transparency in where is the data, who is the owner of the data, and to allow the company to do something or to not do something. Exactly to avoid some issue we see very well in US, some company that share in the non-compliant way the data. We want to be absolutely on compliant direction. No? Absolutely.
If I, John, just come back to your funding question and return on capital. In terms of the capital decision, sometimes our technology has a long repayment period. Like all these things, you don't get your money back in year one. It's a number of years, and you have to make a judgment call in terms of do I invest now, do I postpone it for a year, how do I do that? But that also has an increase in the quality of the technology. How would you approach that kind of decision?
I think what is even more difficult is when you're taking on board technology and there's not a clear repayment or return. So renewable energy might be a good example where there wasn't always clear that there was repaymentability from taking that on board, and so there was a hesitancy of both the farmer buying it because does it make sense from a financial point of view. However, he often felt it was the right thing to do in terms of the environment and so on. So that's where it's quite difficult to finance because there's not a clear business case for it. What we're seeing now with technology is that we're seeing much more sort of evidence of the benefits of taking up technology. So we're starting to see whether it's in water efficiency or various parts of technology, and that makes it so much easier to fund. We still need to take a longer term view. Renewable energy, for example, we are prepared to fund it over 10 years, up to 10 years, which is outside of the normal because there's no underlying asset like you would the John Deere tractor, for example. So we need to start looking at those ways of funding technology. Some of it is also just in line with our values as a bank, in terms of sustainability, etc., creating the future that we want to see. So I think technology is not always a clear business case, done and dusted. And as a bank, we try and take it into consideration. However, we are seeing the uptake of technology is just so much easier when the business case is there. Because when the farmer sees the numbers, and if he sees the bottom line, then it's all systems go. Sure, you still need to look at the timing of it. What is the technology trying to achieve? And so you structure your financial products to suit that need and to maybe suit a longer term sort of outcome. A good example of this is improvement of soil health. Now, improvement of soil health is 5, 6, 7, 8 year journey sometimes. It's starting to speed up a bit now. But many farmers would come to us and say, I want to go on this journey, which sometimes meant in the short term that your cash flow came under pressure. And those benefits are only there from year 5, 6, 7 when it starts to come through. And that's where you need well-researched sort of evidence to help you fund something like that. So I think it's not just plain sailing that technology is going to solve all our issues. But it takes an understanding partner, many partners. It could be more than one, obviously, but including the financier to participate in that.
Jaco, I'm going to pick up on that. Part of technology, we see sometimes drones, and that's technology. We see field view, that's technology. We see John Deere, that's technology. We see seed, that's technology. But also the way of farming. And there's currently, because we're in a country that farming methods are under pressure, that our climate puts pressure on farmers, and we see different ways of doing it. People adapting to more farming in line with nature, and they call it different things, but different ways of farming. And what's your view on how should one approach that? Because clearly there's a risk-benefit relationship. How would you go about it?
Theo, I think that the main thing is just in terms of technology, there's different levels of introducing that into your farming business. And I think the very same with the conservation agriculture, whatever you call it. Like you said, there's a lot of different names. There's a lot of different ways to implement it, and there should be, because your resources are different. The amount of rainfall you get, the soil that you've got. So every farmer's got to experiment on his own farm to what degree he wants to implement that, and he can implement that actually. And there's different ways to skin a cat. And the very same, there's different farming practices working differently in specific areas. And you've got to research and experiment to get to the best practice that's working on your specific farm and even your specific field and sub-areas of your field, like we did in precision farming. We moved from a farm level to a meter by meter level. And in terms of on practices and planting practices, we need to move to that meter by meter level as well.
And that means that 1 meter on my farm can be different depending where on the farm I'm currently in, but it also will differ from region to region, not even talking about province to province. So you need to adapt to what suits you.
And it's also into your management practices, the available resources that you've got, the equipment that you've got, the people, the skill level of the people that you've got, the closeness or the availability of connectivity also influences your practices on your farm. So there's a lot of different impacts that's dependent on what are you doing on your farm.
Martin?
Jaco touched on a very important thing, and John, you mentioned solar or renewable energy. I think that's a key message today is connectivity. I mean, we at Senves invested heavily in collaboration with John Deere in the RTK network. I mean, Jaco, you can't get better lines than a centimeter at the end of the day difference in your lining. But important, we're investing heavily in connecting all the other sensors, from the field sensors right through to your top-end machinery. I mean, we can get an alert on a machine 24 hours, say the machine is running high temperatures and stop the machine. But the connectivity, exactly like the other platforms that we have to roll out in South Africa, is key. And we're busy with a big rollout in terms of that.
I'm going to ask you, perhaps there's this idea that younger people, but first connectivity. I was a few weeks ago in the Northern Cape and I had a rented car by one of the well-known car rent companies. Now, as you well know, there's long distances that's straight lines. And I pushed the speed limit a bit and I got a phone call. And I got a phone call from the car renting agency say that I'm over the speed limit. So kind of, it puts you back. So Big Daddy's watching. That's okay, I'll just bring my speed a bit down.
I just hope you're on hands-free.
You kind of first look around. Connectivity is to the extent where if I use, let's say, Waze, it is purely about connectivity. I was driving to Nampo a few weeks ago and I got a notification that just after the bridge there's a speed cop next to the road when I was entering Orkney. As I exit Orkney, there the guy was. Now I don't know who spotted him, now I want to come back to, there's an idea that younger people are more adaptable or easy adapters to technology. Is that true or is that not true?
It's true to a certain extent, but to give you a very nice example, technology is so advanced that the user friendliness and the usability of it is so easy. My mother of 70 years, she can operate an iPad without any problems. I mean, a couple of years.
That almost that hesitancy, is that disappearing?
It's for sure, and I mean, we had the discussion this morning, myself and Yaku, regarding the platforms in the tractors. I mean, the screens used to be very complicated, and now with the other technology integrating into an iPad, I mean, it's 2 clicks and 2 swipes, and you've got the data, and you get to where you want to be. So it's advanced significantly. I mean, not even to talk about field view.
You're shaking your head.
Yeah, because based on my experience, it's not the age that do this. It's exactly the approach, the mentality the people have. I know 80 years old farmer that play better than me the digital. Okay, and I know, unfortunately, some 20 years old that is not very useful to use digital. Okay,
that's putting it mildly.
Yes. This is why it's more the mentality of the people, the brain of the people versus the age.
So the problem is not the problem, it's the attitude to the problem.
Yes,
that's the problem.
Definitely.
From your experience, Yaku, the adaptability of technology, do you see a resistance, or do you think the reason is rather survival?
I think, as in every business and all the people have a certain restraint towards change. So we see that in the technology, but the moment you see the return you get from a certain technology, the guys are open to it. And I think we see it all the more that guys are open to new technology that really brings return on income back to your pocket. So there's really a large number of adaptability and willingness, and actually people seeking that new technology to implement into their farms.
I'm going to stay with you, Yaku. In terms of technology, margin, so one of our biggest problems in South Africa is unemployment. And we saw the numbers yesterday, and I think it's scary to know that if you add the people that stop looking for a job and the people that can't find a job, 4 out of every 10 households, there's not somebody employed there. And it's people that have, for their whole life, never got a job. They've never had a stable income where they work. Now, the problem is technology reduces cost, but also reduces unskilled labor, and that is what we need. How do one approach that?
I think you're certainly right. The more technology you adopt, the more skilled people you need. The opportunity that, however, creates, you can produce cheaper. So we can compete with the rest of the world. That creates an opportunity downstream for more processing of what you produce. And that creates jobs. And that's what we need in South Africa is more downstream creation of jobs. The jobs isn't going to come from primary agriculture, especially grains. Maybe more labor-intensive agricultural, but not in grains. But the downstream processing of that's where the jobs can be created.
Martin, I'm going to want to touch again. We've mostly focused, we've touched once or twice, but mostly focused on big commercial farming entities. In terms of up-and-coming farmers and technology, obviously one will need to adapt business models to suit that. Big grain companies like Senves is suited to service big commercial successful farming enterprises producing volume. How does one provide some of those services to smaller scale farmers, and how can one change the model?
Yes, we're actively working on a program where we engage with the smaller farmers, and the key here is to make use of commercial farmers like Jaco and the likes to really go into the mentorship. The issue here, if we know what's happening in the soil, I mean that's key. If that's analyzed and we know the soil, the possibilities of that soil, then we can really go and we can focus on the practices, go into the mentoringship. If the funding is sorted, then I don't think there's a real problem, Jaco. And I mean, we've discussed that in Grain SA many times, that the willingness from the commercial farmers to help and really get solutions into place is definitely there.
Jaco?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think that the skills transfer and the training, and I think we've moved a lot in the past 5 years in South Africa towards that. There's a huge amount of willingness in the commercial farmers, and that's where the technology gets transferred as well, because all of a sudden that small scale farmer got access to his neighbor's big plant or big tractor in order to implement on his farm as well, which makes him a lot more profitable.
I'm going to ask, before I take questions from the audience, I'm going to end up by asking everybody one specific question. And the question is, and I want you to have a bit of time to think about it, is if you look at, obviously for anybody that looks at a farming enterprise or equipment or technology, if you look 5 years ago, it's a massive difference in terms of approach. So, but I want you to look at 5 years or 10 years from now. Where is the big opportunities? How will it change, and how will a farming operation have to look in 5 or 10 years' time to be competitive? Because I firmly believe that Julius Malema nor the ANC is going to end up with your land. Your neighbor's going to end up with your land simply because he's a better farmer than you. So how does the farm need to look in 5 or 10 years' time, the farmer, and how will a farm have to look to remain competitive? But let's take a few questions. I'm going to take, is there anybody with a question? Any questions? There's a question over there.
Yes, about the technology. You said it before, we have to produce more without expecting our prices to go up. And that's where technology comes in. The same with a small farmer, and that happens. But don't you foresee between the unions and the government and all the unemployment, somewhere along the line there's going to be a clash? And what are the technology companies doing about that? And are they actually engaging and joining in the conversation?
I think that's a great question. I'm going to give the panel time to think about the answer, and I'm going to probably start with organized agriculture to assist me with the answer as a starting point. So I'll give you some time. Any other questions at this point? Jaco, that is a loaded question, and it comes back to the previous discussion. On the one side, we've got this desperate need for employment. On the other side, we have to remain competitive and sustainable. And the question there was, where does technology fit in? What is an interesting point is the country in the world that in theory is the most advanced in technology also has the lowest unemployment rate in the world. So there's a bit of dichotomy, and one just need to also keep that in mind. If you look at the more advanced countries technology-wise, the less the unemployment is. But in South Africa, we've got a specific problem. Your initial comment on that, and I'm going to ask, I wouldn't ask you because this is a pertinent South African question, but I'm going to ask the rest of the panel their view on that as well. So let's start with you, Jacob.
I think we started with the very first comment that we made was about the social and environmental responsibility that we have, and you made the comment that if we're not profitable, we're not going to do that. Technology makes us profitable, and the moment you create growth in this country, you create jobs as well. So I see technology more in terms of that. If we can create growth, if we can grow the economy, the agricultural economy, that will create downstream jobs, and that will then put the money back into the jobs and the money back into the rural areas. So that's what we need to create through technology.
John?
Yeah, I think that's actually spot on, because we need to be competitive, we need to be profitable, and so to me that's important. If you've got your foundation right, then and you've got a healthy sector, then that will lead to growth. Because I don't think we can bleed the sector and expect to grow jobs. I think we must have a healthy sector and use that as our platform to grow. And Chapter 6 of the National Development Plan has a lot of good aspects in it about growth. So I think it's more about growing the sector as opposed to worrying about the loss of jobs due to technology, because I think it will lead to far greater production. The other point I want to make is that I believe as a country, the growth in the normal economy outside of agriculture, the wider economy, is a critical point. So this has to go hand in hand. If we can get the total economy growing and create jobs, and maybe the whole issue around land as well, especially the urban land question, we need to solve for that. And if we can get the people land for a house, and we can get them employed in the general economy, that will be such a boost to us as a sector as well. So spot on.
Before I get to Jacques, the other element that one almost needs to keep in mind is that employment is almost a last indicator that starts to pick up. You've got confidence, investment, economic growth, and only then do you get unemployment numbers to pick up. So the unfortunate thing is it's almost a pipeline that needs to fill, and it all starts with confidence. And elements of confidence is the policy uncertainty, the land issue, the access to markets, availability of rural infrastructure. Those things need to build confidence, then you get investment, then you get economic growth, and then you start to solve unemployment. Jacques, comment from your side specifically that the technology side, to what extent can it assist, or is it problematic for unemployment?
I think if I get the question right, I think for me it's a supply-demand conversation, because that's going to determine price. I would argue that initially, if you're, and food security is around food availability and affordability. So if food is not affordable, we can have a problem in the medium term or shorter term. Medium term is around coming back to growth, where you stimulate purchase parity or purchase power and a stronger demand for that commodity. So I think it's for us to try and find that balance. But in the short term, your producer has to survive. Otherwise, we've got a crisis 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And I think that for me is the important one. How do you create that balance in the shorter term to make sure that those producers are still there tomorrow?
Martin, is there enough cognizance of this? Does organized labor, business, is this being appreciated?
I think to a certain extent, yes, but the last couple of months, all these conversations, it's very good to get people to really engage and really focus on getting solutions. I mean, we can talk, and at the end of the day, we don't bring the solutions to the table. I think we will get to this.
We're in a better space than we were 3, 6, 12, or 18 months ago.
For sure.
Yes.
Any other questions? Then I'm going to ask every person to take a picture if we were sitting 5 years from now, or 8 years from now, and we had to look at what was required for an agriculture sector to thrive, and how would the farmer look, and the farm and the skill set look in 5 or 10 years from now? And I'm going to start with the gentleman on my left, and I'm not going to ask you about the clothing that when we had a short briefing as we walked in, so he was at makeup and everybody else was getting briefed, and he walked in and he said, what are we talking about? I said to him, it's the fashions of the women on farms, being Italian. But we're not going to talk about that.
I can be an expert.
Let's talk about in 5 or 10 years' time, what will the farm look like, and what will the farmer skills be?
Yeah, I think we need to move from emotional decision, as a farmer normally do, to the data-driven decision.
Are we still too much relying on the emotion
Yes.
and not on data?
Yes. Me too. When I drive or I go to some John Deere tractor, become my emotional, honestly. Okay, and I'm sure all the farmer think like me.
Yeah.
Okay, this is why we need to be more, less farmer and more manager. Okay, I think what I dream for the farmer, because I love the farmland, is that reduce a little bit the emotional part and go more to science and data driven, because in this direction he can better decide to improve the profit. Because at the end of the story, if we have farmer in the next 5 years, it's only because it's real profitable business. Otherwise, the small or medium farm disappear. Is a logic. And only the big farm resist. Not to make profitability, but resist. I want that all the farmers have the possibility to make their business, and this is why this is for me my comment or my dream.
From emotional to rational.
Yes.
This, Jaco, that's a big comment. Do you agree with that? Is there value in it?
I think I agree 90% with that, but there's still certain instances where you need the knowledge of a farmer to determine whether to spray or not to spray. The data is an input to that decision, and I think that the input is way better now than it was 10 years or even 5 years ago, but you still have got to make that certain decision. I agree totally, the farmer's got to move much more away, and we've seen it in the past 10 years, away from the practical, hands-on farmer more to a manager, and that's going to move even further. And the skill set of that farmer is going to move more to a data scientist, researcher, interpreting of data than it is at the moment. So that's certainly going to evolve, just as the farm worker is going to evolve into a skilled farm worker that knows technology. A lot of data that we've been collected, we need to interpret that now. Which is the best practice? Where do we get the best information? So the research on farm is going to move way forward through the interpretation of data, and we've got to adapt and adopt our practices towards that. So the farmer's got to be more resilient, faster adopters, faster adapters of what they do and how they do things.
Can I just pick up on 2 points there? Interesting, a while ago, a farmer said to me that something happened on his farm that he never thought would happen ever. One of his tractor drivers was headhunted, and he thought it would never happen. But that becomes an operator of a very expensive technology piece of equipment. You talk about the skill set that needs to change, both from the farmer as well as from the people that work for the farmer. Does organized agriculture have a role in that? Do they recognize that? Are they involved in that? And to what extent?
Most certainly, the training of the people needs to get better. And that's a pity in South Africa, especially where you see the agricultural colleges like the Glen and the Pompoenboere in Potch is actually diminishing. So we need to pick that up again. We need to do our own training of farmers, and that's where we need our input suppliers to train the farmers and the farm workers on specific equipment. And then to the next level, train the farmers to get the data and how to interpret the data. Your agriculturists got to be better and more equipped to advise the farmers. So the whole package of information and people inputting into a farm has got to change in the future.
Jacques, from your point of view, are the green engines going to become bigger and bigger, or where are we going?
Yeah, so I think it's no. I think when I come back to my earlier point, so I think research suggests that we need to increase food production by 70% in the next couple of decades. so the challenge is going to remain: produce more at an affordable price without damaging the environment. So that will remain. So how we see it, and I agree with Jaco, is to say the Internet of Things, data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning. That's going to be part of the future. Moving from automation to autonomy. That's where we're going to land.
Just what do you mean by that?
If I can use an example, and it's my personal view from a motor industry. That car that you rented the other day, it's got park distance control. It alerts you when you move lanes. It keeps distance in the car in front of you, and today you pay for that. For me, it's a way to test automation, to get to a level of autonomy. So tomorrow, that car will drive itself.
It'll do those things itself.
Yes, and I think agriculture is moving in exactly that same direction, and that's going to help us to a degree with expertise at farm level, because your operator now, because of machine learning, because of AI, etc., the machine will do most of that for you. You will still need your operator to make sure that you don't drive into a ditch or with the ESCOM pull along the way. But a lot of that thinking is going to be taken away, putting into the hands of your farm owner on his iPad or his mobile phone. I think that's where we're in the direction that we're going to go.
John?
Yeah, I mean, what Jacques said is actually fascinating. I think the challenge for us as a country is how do we ensure that all of this creates inclusive growth, leads to transformation of our sector, yet still maintaining a very competitive standing. So I think as a country moving forward, again, maybe my personal view is that the private sector has a massive role to play in that, because I really believe that government doesn't have the capacity to do this. And so a lot is going to rest on our shoulders as private sector to achieve a competitive sector and for our commercial farmers to stay in business. But how do we bring the rest of the country along while still preserving food security at both national level and also a household level? From a financing point of view, I mean, this is exciting stuff. It's how the banks actually grasp this stuff. And again, is what information do we feed into our systems? It could lead, again, in our particular context as a country, new funding models, because the smallholder funding model is not particularly friendly to a bank because of the regulations that we play under. And the government will still play a very important role from a funding point of view, and hopefully blending a client to a commercial funding proposition over time. But this information and this technology could allow us to come up with new funding models which possibly don't rely as much as we have in the past on tangible security, the farm property. Now we're looking at the flow of this food or fiber through the value chain and monitoring that, as opposed to hoping it all works out well, and then if not, well, we take the farm away. Now we're going to monitor this thing from start to finish. And maybe that's going to bring about new ways of funding as well, which is quite exciting.
And just on that, and I'm going to, this is a kind of a left field question, but you talk about funding models. One of the policy uncertainties we are talking about is the issue around land, and I just want to throw it in. In terms of your funding models, as one of the bigger banks in the agriculture sector, you haven't changed any of your risk credit criteria based on the land debate.
No, we're still funding farmers, and our first port of call is repaymentability. Obviously, in determining that repaymentability, we look at a lot of the factors that have been spoken about today, which starts to look at the jockey. Is he doing a good job? Is he taking the technology on board? Is that translating into financial statements which show repaymentability over time? Is he responsible in the way that he's employing technology and treating his staff and treating the environment, etc.? So those are important things, and which I think are fundamentals that as a bank we still follow, and therefore there's no change from a land reform point of view.
Martin, I'm getting signals and signs and stuff there from the side, but you can ignore that. In terms of your view of the next 5 or 10 years, sitting in the middle of technology providers, input providers, mechanization, funding, how would that look in 5 or 10 years' time?
You said you wanted a picture, and you mentioned ways. I hope the audience is using Waze. Let's picture that Waze app with the various sensors, the IoTs, the AIs, everything on a map on farm level. So you can really zoom into a problem. So everything will be managed by triggers. You'll have an alert, the machine is running high on temperature, get an alert, stop the machine. So let's zoom out from a service provider, the Senvest equipment service provider. We can immediately send field staff out to fix that problem. But from a banking or our credit point of view, we will exactly know what's going on in the field. So we can really real-time manage the risks in the field. So yeah, it's a small ways in the on farm level, zoom it out to a industry level. That's it.
Will we get to a point where technology companies, that the companies that supply funding will in effect more be interested in the quality of the information than the underlying elements of it? Are we getting into that direction?
Yeah, I think we quite often talk about data, but the quality of data is more important.
Yeah,
and I think what we're talking about here is if you can pull data out of a machine, so you've got your swell map, you've got your historic yield maps out of your combine harvester, from your seed roll, your plant, you know exactly what your plant population is. I think that's real data that you can work with. There's no manipulation, there's no human intervention. So quality of data for me is a starting point. Your outcome is as good as what you feed.
And that's where you guys sit in terms of trying to make it sure it's quality and trying to collate it.
Yeah, bad data is no data. Okay, I think this is
Even wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Even wrong.
We need, at the end of our time, I'm going to allow, is there one more question, and then I'm going to allow a closing comment, and I'm going to go back to Jaco for the closing comment in terms of South African farmers, technology, and the rest of the world. Any last question? Before I end, is there a question? Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, he was right behind the camera. Apologies.
I think what a lot of industry is battling with is how you mine, excuse me, how you mine this big data. I think the question too is, how do we share the data that we're getting out of all the applications and equipment, etc., perhaps at a government level, to help kind of coordinate efforts around what we should be focusing on? I don't know if that makes sense.
Let's thank you. I think it makes sense in the sense of policy and decision making, because the better your data is and the better the information that you can gather from that data, the better decision making and policy could be. Any volunteers to take a stab at that question? Jaco.
Yeah, I think if we look at crop insurance and you will look at the Americas, they've got a certain crop insurance subsidized from government. But in order to do that, they need the information from the farmer, the right information. How much are you going to plant? When are you going to plant? Which crops are you going to plant? So if we can use that data for a return and we can give it to government, government's going to make a much better crop estimate and all the other policy information they can use. They can actually use my information on how profitable I am on my farm in order to regulate and to populate their policies to suit farmers and to get new production into new farmers into production.
Are you aware in the rest of the world that governments use your
Yeah, and the concept also in Europe is every time that the farmer allows the government to use their data. The name of the varieties, the surface is important in Europe because in Europe we receive money from Europe to grow the land, okay? And this is also the exchange. I receive money because I'm complaining and I use this chemical in this part of the field, I use this nitrogen in this part of the field, I feed back the Europe government with my data because I receive also money to do this. Okay, in Europe works like that.
But I think if I come back to the question, so quality of data is important, but as important as where is the data? So that data lake becomes important. So how do we aggregate those data into an area that we can access? We talk about engaged hectares as deer. In today's South Africa, just over a third of planted hectares in South Africa is under John Deere RTK Precision Ag. So roughly a third of the data is available to us today. Do we use it and mine it? Is the data analytics there yet? No, but it's there. We know where it is and we trust the data. So I think it's something that we can build on. Is the need there? For sure. I think a simple example, as a livestock farmer, I would like to know where there's a disease breakout in my area. And if all vets could load into a central data point to say when they find this disease, I think it's easier for all of us to manage that. And I think grain production is exactly the same.
Thank you. It's nice comments there, I think. Thank you for the question. To the panel, thank you very much. I think it was an informative discussion. And I think like in the most industry in South Africa, we have to be adapters to technology simply because of the difficult environment we're operating in. And I think one needs to be positive, and one needs to congratulate the South African farmers that's without government assistance in a country that's not necessarily the best conditions for agriculture, being able to compete not only internationally, but provide sustainable, quality, healthy food on scale to a big population. So from my side, thank you very much. Thanks for your contribution.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nation in Conversation, in proud partnership with Senvis, Bayer, Engen, Nedbank, Afgri, Grain SA, and John Deere, in association with Hinterland and Isuzu.